Yeah. Let me start by commending Professor Mama for the detailed presentation. It was quite insightful, and I think she was able to cover all areas relating to African philosophy and women's participation in philosophy. I'll be talking about women and climate change in Africa, some ecocentric considerations in environmental sustainability. Let me first provide a summary of what I did in this paper. I tried to look at climate change as a problem that is facing Africa generally, many African countries. And I discovered that it could be natural, climate change can be natural, it can also be artificial due to human activities. But whenever climate change is being experienced, there are roles that women play, African women play. As a matter of fact, I mentioned some African countries and the roles women play in climate change adaptation and mitigation. Because they belong to vulnerable population, I wouldn't want a situation where women should be seen or are being seen as members that their contributions or roles in climate change adaptation and mitigation can be downplayed. So rather than taking advantage of their vulnerability, I highlighted their roles and I tried to describe their roles as ecocentric. Ecocentric in the sense that they see intrinsic value in nature, that we human beings are part of nature, but at the same time, nature has intrinsic worth. And because nature has intrinsic worth, stakeholders should borrow a cue from them, that is the roles women perform during climate change, in order to be able to achieve environmental sustainability. So I'll be looking at ecocentrism as juxtaposed with anthropocentrism. I wouldn't want anthropocentrism because it is still too human-centered. It tends to negate the other side, the natural world. And because of this negation, we wouldn't want a situation where we are going to have environmental crisis, environmental degradation, or ecosystem destruction. So we want to see ecocentrism as something, as a philosophical viewpoint that would help stakeholders in order to be able to achieve environmental sustainability. So like our practice, I started with a theoretical definition of those three terms that are crucial in my discussion. Climate change, and I defined it as a long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns. It can be natural, like I said, and can also be artificial. I will get to discuss that while we proceed. Then I looked at ecocentrism as a philosophical and ethical position that places the well-being and intrinsic value of the natural world, including ecosystems, animals, plants, and landscapes, at the center of consideration. It recognizes that humans are part of the natural world rather than separate from it, and that our actions have consequences for the environment and other living beings. Then I also looked at environmental sustainability. It refers to the ability of the natural environment to support human life and economic activities over a long term without degrading the natural systems and processes that provide essential ecosystem services. Then I tried to look at some of the natural causes of climate change. We have volcanic eruptions, sometimes we have hurricanes, we have earthquakes, changes in the Earth's orbit, solar variability, natural climate change. We all, at least we can relate with those that are natural, things that are not caused by human activities, things that are caused by changes in the sun, the activities of the sun. And artificial causes include greenhouse gas emissions, burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Sometimes people release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, thereby trapping it in the atmosphere. We have deforestation and land use changes, agricultural and livestock production, industrial processes, transportation, and all that. So I also try to look at the impact of climate change on the vulnerable population. But we discovered that for the purpose of this argument, our focus will be more on climate change that are caused by human activities. So many a time, hello, many a times when we have experiences like this, women tend to suffer the most. They bear the brunt of these climate change stressors. So we are trying to look at some of the effects of climate change on human beings, on women particularly. Sometimes we discover that when there is flood or when there is drought, crops will not be produced, crops cannot be grown. We discovered that some people try to migrate from where they find themselves. They are forcefully displaced to other areas where they think they can cope. In most cases, women are left behind with their children to take care of. The examples that we had in the north during the last rainy season in Nigeria, we had so many cases of flood, people being forcefully displaced from their places of abode. And there was a particular news that I listened to in which women, a particular woman narrated her experience about spending 8 years in a concentration camp. She has spent 8 years and government does not seem to have anything in sight in terms of finding a solution to their problems. In a situation where you have people that are converged in a particular place, conflict is inevitable. So trying to provide shelter for them, trying to ensure that these people are well placed is also another problem for the government. So in cases where we have flood, livestock will be carted away, properties will be destroyed, people's businesses will be affected. So we also have problems of hunger. People will go hungry for so many days because they couldn't provide enough adequate nutrition for them. They couldn't provide adequate nutrition. So I looked at some countries in Africa where women are being the experiences of women in some of these African countries. And I saw that in Ethiopia, for instance, women and girls have been forced to drop out of school to support their families due to the increased burden of household and farm chores, as men and adult boys migrate to urban centers looking for work to do. In Rwanda, women have been trained on innovative techniques to convert organic waste into cooking gas and biofertilizer, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving their lives. In Somalia, women are struggling to find water due to drought, with many carrying jerry cans of water from shallow wells dug from the sand along the Shebelle River bed. Then in Senegal, women also walk long distances to fetch drinking water, cooking water, and even water they will use to wash due to 35% decline in total rainfall over the last 2 decades. In Kenya, women walk miles also to search for water for domestic use due to disappearance of snow crabs on Mount Kenya, affecting water availability for farming and other agricultural purposes. So we see that there are so many burdens that women need to carry due to the problem of disasters arising from climate change. So the effects ranges from increased workload for women. They will have to carry extra burden because their partners have been forcefully migrated to where they can seek help for the family to look for good jobs. Food insecurity is also a problem. Women have to ensure that they ensure that food security is being prioritized. They try to look for ways of ensuring that there's food production, food processing, and food packaging. Is also a big health risk for them. Their women are vulnerable to climate-related health risks, such as heat stress, respiratory problems, and waterborne diseases. And I've also talked about displacement and migration. But in spite of all this, I discovered that the principle of ecocentrism has helped women in ensuring that they put their ecosystem in proper perspective. Ecocentrism tries to see the relationship, the interrelatedness between humans and the environment. They try to look at the intrinsic value, the intricate connection between human beings and the world in which we live. We can talk about air pollution, for instance, we talk about all these problems. But when we have ecocentrism, the ecosystem should be seen as a separate entity that cannot be used by human beings to satisfy their own interest. Human beings, they have their own rights, just as we have the ecosystems also having their own rights. But the ecosystem is intrinsically valuable on its own, not instrumentally valuable, because human beings cannot abuse the ecosystem. Otherwise, they are going to have the problem of degradation and destruction. And this is where I'm recommending that stakeholders should also take a cue from women, because of what their roles in trying to mitigate the effect of climate change, and also trying to adapt to climate change. So apart from the issue of the intricate connection, the interconnectedness, holism, ecocentrism can also be seen as being a complete environmental framework that tends to take into consideration human beings, the value of human beings, and the value of the ecosystem, that is the natural world. So we talked about intrinsic value, interconnectedness as one of the principles of ecocentrism, holism, then non-anthropocentrism. Well, if you ask me, I would say that many ecocentrists, they frown at anthropocentrism because anthropocentrism is too human-centered. It does not give room for other species. It gives room for only human species, and it believes that the natural world can be used to satisfy the interests of human beings. So because it is too anthropocentric, the ecocentrics tend to frown at anthropocentrism because it cannot work in a society where there's need for us to preserve and protect the ecosystem. So we also look at ways in which women, when we talk about climate mitigation, when we talk about climate adaptation during disasters, when we have climate change crisis, what are the roles that women, African women, play in trying to ensure that there is a adequate adaptation strategies? What do they do? So we can say that they partake in climate smart agriculture. Women develop and implement climate resistant, resilient agricultural practices. They ensure food security and sustainable livelihoods. They try as much as possible to engage in disaster risk reduction because of the gift that women have. Because of women lead disaster risk reduction. They have adequate understanding and proper knowledge of the way the environment is. So they are able to actually detect warning signals in order to be able to evacuate people from disaster scenes or before even the occurrence of climate disasters. So they implement ecosystem-based adaptation strategies. They restore natural habitats. They promote biodiversity. They support ecosystem services. They also involve themselves in educating people such that people will now become aware of the implications of climate change disasters, and now they can also adapt or be resilient to it. So women educate themselves, their families, communities about climate change, the impact and the solutions. We see African women sometimes organizing awareness campaigns. Women design and implement awareness campaigns using social media and storytelling to raise climate consciousness. Then they also they share traditional ecological knowledge and climate resilient strategies with younger generations. Then when we talk about leadership and policy, we also have women advocating for climate policies. Sometimes stakeholders tend to lose sight of the implications, of the environmental implications of their policies. They tend to, maybe because they have so many things competing with the policies that they want to enact, sometimes they talk about poverty, sometimes they focus on security, sometimes they focus on insecurity, sometimes they focus on inequality, so many things, health issues and all that. They tend to neglect or tend to overlook the implications, environmental implications of their policies. So we also have women trying to do some, okay, I've talked about adaptability, which is food security, water management, disaster risk. Then in terms of mitigation, women also play roles. Renewable energy entrepreneurs, we see them as a matter of fact, some people call them environmental stewards because they take responsibility for whatever actions they want to embark on, so environmental actions that they think are beneficial for members of the community. So women are increasingly involved in renewable energy. They promote the adoption of solar, wind, and other clean energy sources. They engage in sustainable agricultural practice in terms of mitigation. So they call them sustainable agricultural practitioners. Women farmers and agricultural leaders promote climate resilient agricultural practices such as agroforestry, permaculture, and regenerative agriculture. So they also engage in training of communities, organizations, and governments on climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. They promote awareness and action. Then policy and advocacy leaders, women leaders advocate for climate policies, regulations, and international agreements that support climate change mitigation and sustainable development. So we also need to ask the question of why is it that many times women tend to be viewed, because I was able to say when I started that their activities should be seen as ecocentric rather than downplaying the importance of the activities that they embark on during climate change. And we recognize that when you take ecocentrism as a philosophical theory and as an ethical theory, ecocentrism infuses environmental ethics. Ecocentrism helps in trying to create a balance between how individuals interact with the natural world and how the natural world provides services that are beneficial for individuals in that particular society. That reciprocal engagement, the mutual engagement between the natural world and human beings tend to make us to see that the ecosystem provides certain services that we cannot overlook. For instance, the ecosystem provides services like air and water pollution, climate regulation, soil formation. You can also talk about crop protection. So all these things, they work hand in hand in order to ensure that we have sustainable development and in order to ensure that we have a balanced biodiversity. So the key principles of environmental sustainability now entails managing the natural resources such as water, soil, biodiversity in a way that maintains their quality and quantity over time. There is need to minimize waste and pollution, reducing waste and pollution to prevent harm to human health and the environment. There is need to also protect the ecosystem. There is need to preserve and restore natural ecosystems such as forests, wetlands, oceans, for they provide essential services like air and water filtration, which I have also mentioned. Then the use of renewable energy. You need to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Sources like solar, wind, hydroelectric power to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change. Then we also need to have a sustainable land use. There's need to manage land use to balance human needs, such as agriculture and urbanization with environmental protection and conservation. We discover that if all these things are being taken into consideration by policymakers, they are being taken into consideration by stakeholders, then we are going to have a stable ecosystem. We are going to have a well-preserved ecosystem. Environmental policy and legislation is also important. When you talk about policies that are being enacted, we need to ask federal government how often, because there is also need for them to pause at intervals to see whether their policies, the policies that they are adopting, is a policy that is ecosystem friendly. So ecocentrism informs environmental policy and legislation in order to ensure that ecological principles and values are integrated into decision-making process. That is why we are advocating for ecocentrism, because if we do not have a stable ecosystem, we are not likely going to have what we can describe as a sustainable environmental sustainability. So sustainable development goals also, ecocentrism approaches and align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to balance human well-being with environmental sustainability. Then we also have ecological governance, ecosystem and the environment in governance decision. So we are saying, in essence, what I'm saying in essence is that we need a society that is balanced in order for us to mitigate the effects of climate change. We need a particular society that takes into cognizance the fact that human beings cannot take advantage of the natural system, or the natural world. Human beings cannot abuse the ecosystem, and human beings cannot they cannot misuse things that are being provided by the that are naturally provided due to the fact that the environment should be preserved.
Hello, ma'am. It seems we lost her. Thank you very much, Professor Lanre-Abass, for your presentation. I don't know if you're able to reconnect quickly. Okay. If she's unable to reconnect, I think we'll just go to our next presenter.
Yeah, let me just conclude. Okay. How many minutes have I spent?
Please go ahead.
Have I spent? Okay, so I just want to conclude that I want to leave us with 3 or 4 lines. We can cultivate a deeper appreciation for the natural world and recognize the intrinsic value of non-human nature, so that we'll work towards a more sustainable and equitable climate resilient future. Then the intersection of women's empowerment, climate change, and ecocentric considerations offers a powerful framework for environmental sustainability in Africa. Hence, by recognizing the intrinsic value of nature, promoting sustainable livelihoods, empowering women as environmental stewards, and fostering climate resilience, we can build a more equitable and sustainable future for all. Then we cannot achieve environmental sustainability in Africa if nature is viewed by humans as beneficial only because it satisfies their interests. Hence, nature has intrinsic value. Ascribing intrinsic value to nature will make humans tread gently, not only concerning our relationship with one another, but also how we handle beings that are non-human. In short, the ecosystem at large, since our survival depends on them. Then finally, by adopting ecocentric approaches, stakeholders can contribute to mitigating climate change by promoting sustainability and protecting the planet for future generations. I thank you all for your time.